Welcome everyone for joining us today for our webinar, which is 2012 Market Research Trends to look out for. We got some great speakers and a wonderful moderator with us today, and we strongly encourage our audience to interact with us, ask us questions, give us some comments. We are very excited to be able to do this and kind of be able to pick our presenters' brains, and so we encourage you guys to do the same. Again, go ahead and use that by going to the GoToWebinar control panel. So this Market Research Trends webinar is sponsored and brought to you by Survey Analytics. So we are an enterprise survey software company, and we also do mobile field research as well. So again, welcome everyone, and I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Ivana Taylor, our moderator.
Thanks, Esther. I'm Ivana Taylor. I'm the publisher of DIYmarketers.com and the editor for Survey Analytics blog and Question Pro blog. And I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to some of the best experts in the business. Today we have with us Romi Mahajan, CMO of Metavana, Leonard Murphy, CEO of BrandScan 360, and we were supposed to have Vivek Bhaskaran, the CEO of Survey Analytics, but I believe he got pulled away at the very last minute. But I promise you, as much as we love him, you will not miss him too much because we got Romy and Leonard here to keep us on track. Before we get started with the trends, what I'd really love to do is to give our presenters the opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about themselves. Romy, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Ivana and Esther. My name is Romi Mahajan. I'm the CMO of a startup company called Metavana. We are a startup based in the San Francisco Bay Area that's building a social sentiment engine for use for brand value and for companies to decipher what is being said about them on the social web. Previous to this, I was the director of sales and strategy for the digital marketing and search team at Microsoft. I've done 2 stints at Microsoft, in total about 9 years, and I've also been a marketing strategist and consultant in my own company, KKM Group, for the past several years as well. I'm incredibly excited to be on this webcast, and if I might throw in a plug for myself, I've got a book coming out in the next 60 days, so watch out for it. It's called Cool is for Fools, and it's about marketing from an irreverent standpoint. So that's a bit about myself.
Well, thank you, Romy, and I expect to get a copy of that book so I can review it.
You bet.
Okay, let's toss it over to Leonard Murphy, CEO of BrandScan 360. Leonard, tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you muted, Leonard? Because we cannot hear you if you're talking.
Yes, I was. My apologies. The Georgia webinars once again. So, and here I was trying to be cool to match up with Romy, and I just end up as a fool. So, there you go. So I am the Leonard Murphy, CEO of BrandScan 360, which is a startup focused on the intersection of mobile and social media for business intelligence and data collection. Most people probably know me more as the editor-in-chief of the Green Book blog and the Green Book Research Industry Trends Survey and the Green Book newsletter. So industry pundit, which just means I have a big mouth and I like to talk about things and think about the future of research. So glad to be here. This is certainly in my sweet spot, and thank you.
Excellent, excellent. And like I said, Vivek is supposed to be here, and he got pulled away. Esther, do you want to put in a plug for Survey Analytics and tell us a little bit about what Vivek's been up to recently?
Boy, you know, this could probably take the whole webinar, so I don't know if I should go there. But yes, Vivek Bhaskaran has been very busy. We are growing quite largely. We've got mobile research platforms, we've got field research platforms, we've got our basic tool, Question Pro, still going very strong worldwide, as well as exponential growth in our enterprise level, which is Survey Analytics. And we're really excited. Next year, we're going to expand into even more products and items. So if you are a fan of research and you love technology, I suggest highly to sign up for our blog. And Ivana's a wonderful blog editor, and we've got wonderful people that write for us and just kind of keep us in our mind, because we're still going very strong after all these years. So.
Well, that's wonderful, and we'll be talking about some of the new stuff that you may have to jump into later. But first, what I'd like to do is kind of set up the game space, so to speak. What you see on your screen now are the top trends in 2012 that we're going to be talking about. What you can expect is not a lecture, joy of joys. What you're going to hear is a lot of bantering, communicating back and forth. Probably the only structure I would like to put in place is that we sort of more or less speak about one at a time. So I'm going to put a trend up on the screen, and then we'll just basically, I might ask a few questions, and I just really like to hear what Leonard and Romy have to say about the trend that's going on. So the basic format will be, kind of describe what the trend is, give us maybe some examples, and maybe some tools or things that we can expect to see in the future, or how we can take advantage of that trend, okay? So I'm just going to jump right in there with gamification. Who would like to start? Can someone explain exactly what gamification is for those of us in the gifted class?
Yeah, so this is Romi Mahajan. It's one of the trends that I have been thinking about a lot, talking about, writing about, and actually enacting through some of my own business dealings. Gamification at its essence is essentially taking the spirit of a game, i.e. an engagement platform, something that has rules and voluntary participation, something that's fun and interesting, and applying it to a variety of different areas in business, whether it be how you design a website, how you design a mobile interface, or frankly, how you design a motivation system for your employees. We've noticed that that games are universal, they're understood universally, and that they can be enormously helpful in creating some sort of action, whether that action be people clicking on your website or your seller selling more software, as it were. So gamification, again, is applying the concept of a game to anything and everything. I think that it's quite clear that people are familiar with the metaphor of a game, but very few people are actually applying that to their business processes and their models for incenting or exciting or eliciting human behavior. So that's what gamification is at its essence. I'd love to hear Lenny's perspective, but I think it's a huge trend, and one that if one misses, if you miss that boat, you're going to miss a huge area, not only for profit, but also for having a ton of fun in the world of business. So.
Yeah, no, thanks, Romy. And I agree with your definition entirely. Like you have been playing in this arena for about 2 years now, with actually bringing this to market, especially in the realm of market research. And since the slide's about gamifying your surveys, I think that there's a challenge there to make that happen. It goes against the way that we think about structuring market research traditionally. However, there's a significant amount of evidence now that the whole process of asking questions in kind of a false scenario is not necessarily the optimal way to be able to gain insight. So I think the real opportunity for gamification, particularly from an insight standpoint, is to create scenarios where consumers are actually letting go of the cognitive aspects, where they're not really thinking about the decision making, but instead are acting out scenarios that may be more honest and more appropriate to actually how they make decisions.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Lenny. I would agree with you totally on that point.
Yeah. There's tons and tons of evidence out there, and that's a real paradigm shift in research. It's a pain point. It's going to be a while before we see that really take off. And there's a lot of companies from outside of the traditional market research space that are applying those principles and are gaining traction and being successful. So now I would expect to see companies like SurveyMonkey, for instance, that are now moving into the research space. They're going to start incorporating some of these elements. We're going to see it certainly happen, I think, with Facebook and a lot of the social media networks. Would not surprise me at all if Zynga actually started doing this more from an insight generation standpoint. They're collecting buttloads of data as it is. They just need to structure it a little bit differently. So I certainly believe that it is going to be one of the big trends, probably one of the defining aspects over the next 5 years.
If I can just add two quick things, and then Yvonne, if you wanted to move on to another trend, that's fine. To Lenny's point, gamification can be done well or it can be done badly, right? So if it's some sort of false thing in which people or the gaming aspects are being exposed too much, it's clearly going to be seen as some sort of false way of eliciting information from people. So again, gamification, like any other trend, it can be done badly, it can be done well, it can be done okay. And my encouragement for people is to really get into the depth of it and to understand how best to elicit action and behavior, as opposed to just thinking that throwing up a game on their website is going to work. I definitely recommend Jane McConnell's book, Reality is Broken. I think it's the single best book on gamification that exists, as well as some of the O'Reilly Press books on gamification, including one called Gamification by Design. Those two are very interesting books that will certainly set any reader in good stead with regard to gamification. The second thing that I think about broadly with gamification is that if you're in a profession, I'm a marketer and the last 5 years, marketing has had to fight sort of battles that it never really had to before. The battles were around justifying itself to other parts of the company. And I think that if you're in an area that is under attack or is somewhat moribund, gamification might be a great way to introduce others to what your profession does. So for me, market research has been siloed for too long. And if market researchers can gamify what they do and expose it to other parts of the company, I think they'll be given their due accord internally, as opposed to what exists right now. So those are two facts of gamification I'd like to bring out.
One thing that I would like to ask you guys is if you have any examples. Romy, you mentioned something being done well and something being done poorly. Do you have an example of something we may have already experienced, or can you give us an easy way to get started successfully?
Yes, I'll tell you a bad example of gamification, and this is an age-old one in market research around taking a survey, and 1 out of 250,000 people will win a Ferrari, or 1 out of whatever people will win an Xbox, and that's not going to entice people, right? That's of course a game, but it's just it's so ham-handed and it's so old and old-fashioned, and I don't think that'll really get sort of people to behave, or it certainly won't elicit truthful answers. So I think that's a bad example. A good example I can bring from my own past was around an IT department at one of the companies I worked for that used to do incredible work, and what it would do is it would send out these emails to the broad base of employees and talk about sort of have the employees guess, for instance, how many pieces of spam did the IT department stop? How much is the average downtime when you do a server room move, and how much was our downtime? And got people to start engaging and guessing, and thereby really won all kinds of plaudits internally for people. Finally, people understood how much IT does for the rest of the organization. And I thought that was a really interesting example of gamification. So again, you can do it in the ham-handed, primitive way, or you can do it in an intelligent way. It really depends on you to do it right.
Leonard last word on gamification.
Yeah, just to echo Romy, yeah, sweepstakes, yeah, that's probably not the best way to do things. On a great example, I think, and this is totally appropriate for market research, Dunkin' Donuts was working with a company, and I don't recall the name right now, unfortunately, but on the Dunkin' Donuts Facebook page, where you can go in and create your perfect beverage utilizing their different flavors of coffee. And that is it's an interactive game. It looks like anything else that you would play online, but it's designed for them to understand the preferences around size and choices on their coffee consistency. And that's how they've been rolling out new beverages based on the feedback they've received through this game process. So that is a research game.
Sounds like Conjoint to me.
It is. It absolutely is. That's great analogy. It absolutely is. You're making trade-offs, and you're doing it in a visual way, and it's very fun. And you don't realize that you're playing a game. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. You don't realize that you're actually taking a survey. You just think you're playing a game. Which I think that's a great lesson for us to think about. That eventually we may reach the point where if respondents think that they're taking a survey, we're probably doing something wrong.
I love that point.
That's excellent. And that actually brings us over to a trend that Romy had first started talking about, so I'm going to give him the first word, is consumerization. Say more about that.
Yeah, so consumerization is something I had been thinking about for some time when I was at Microsoft. and have been writing about it since about 2006, 2007. And really, what consumerization is at its heart is it's what I call the tail wagging the dog. It really, I started writing about it from an IT perspective, where it used to be that the enterprise IT department would tell each one of us what technology we were allowed to use, right? You'll have to use this type of computer, you'll have to use this type of phone, you'll have to have these security settings on it, and so on and so forth. And the rise of devices like iPhones and Windows phones and Android phones, the rise of social networks, the rise of people wanting to make their own personal and emotional decisions about technology have actually forced the enterprise IT to make changes in the way they approach things. So for instance, if you work at a company that mandates BlackBerries, let's say, and suddenly 10,000 of you bring in iPhones, IT is probably going to make changes. Otherwise, some of you will say, look, my freedom is being encroached upon, I'm going to leave. So consumerization is about the head and the tail of the comet being inverted, and the consumer being in charge. And I think that if we think about that, and we think about the lack of the old notion of the hypodermic needle effect, where a company says something and the rest of us obey, that's really the trend of consumerization. And it would be super interesting for me to see market research or a market research firm take consumerization as a core plank of what it does, and to, again, to invert its model and to sell back to corporations what consumers are thinking instead of the other way around.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Leonard, what are your thoughts?
I think that Romi's right. There's actually a movement now with several companies, and you're seeing it particularly from the panel companies, that are moving away from this idea of doing ad hoc access to consumers and treating that as a commodity, but rather looking at building what is effectively their own databases of consumer preferences and information that they're doing through a variety of ways, through running surveys, through mobile apps, all the metadata that's collected there, through integration with social networks, the Facebook APIs and Twitter APIs, and all of the tons and tons of data that you get from that standpoint, and empowering consumers in such a way that they own that data, and putting the whole value proposition on its head, where today Google, Facebook, et cetera, they own the platform, they own the data, and consumers are just there to, the value exchange is in exchange for the platform, they get inundated with advertising, et cetera, et cetera. This new shift is the idea that the consumers are the base, they're the core of everything, and they're making the decisions about who gets access to their information and how it's being used, and it's really empowering them to turn that dynamic totally on its head, and engaging with brands in a very, very different way. The movement around personal data banking is part of that, and I think we'll see that really grow over the next few years. It would not surprise me if in the next 5 or 10 years we see Google or Facebook totally have to change their business models from a revenue standpoint and effectively become revenue-generating partners with consumers in order for them to gain access to their data. And that also addresses a lot of privacy concerns that are out there right now as well. So right now the issue is that, nobody likes the idea that, these companies come in and get my information used without my permission, but if all of a sudden that's shifted and it's me choosing how my data is used and who's using it, when, where, and how, it's not a privacy issue anymore. So
wow, that's fascinating. Is there anything that we as marketers should be doing to set ourselves up to take advantage of this trend?
I think we really need to start thinking about the value that we bring to consumers versus how we use them ourselves.
Very interesting. A trend I'm seeing as our conversation is unrolling, and that I hope that we have time to wrap up for, is how interconnected all these trends are, one connected to the other.
Absolutely. The one thing I'd leave our listeners on is a thought experiment, which is we traditionally think of B2B and B2C marketing. Think about C2B, consumer to business. Think about consumer being at the head, the headwaters, and the business being downstream. So good thing we can do another webcast on, but I'd love people to opine about that, whether it's pings to the blog or questions on this webcast.
Oh, love it, love it. Well, you guys have already talked a little around this. Our next trend that we're going to talk about is network intelligence. And so I'm actually going to flip the scales a little bit and start with Leonard. Can you tell us anything about network intelligence and how we can take advantage of it?
You know, I think when I hear network intelligence, what I think is big data. Maybe that might not be the intention, but that's where my head goes. And that is the idea that there's so much, I mean, zettabytes of data that are available at this point through the interconnectedness of all of our global networks. The next great opportunity is to start pulling that data into centralized locations and then learning not just how to mine the hell out of it, but how to use that from a predictive standpoint, and to start building algorithms that actually predict specific outcomes on both a macro and a micro level, meaning, you know, broad trends and consumer choices. I always think about the movie Minority Report, and if you guys recall that movie with Tom Cruise, and it's a future not that far away. I think it was supposed to be in 2015 or 2020, where there was so much interconnectedness from a technology standpoint that you could predict the behaviors and the needs of consumers very, very effectively, because there was the combination of the POS data and the social data and, you know, the usage data, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's what network intelligence is about, is that ability to actually pull data together, connect the dots, look for the patterns, and then predict outcomes as a result of that.
Oh, awesome. Romy, over to you.
I think, when I think of network intelligence, I think about two things. One is what Lenny talked about around big data and deciphering it and separating the signal from the noise, et cetera. But there's another aspect to it, which is fundamentally about the business we're in, and that is about sharing, right? We're in a business that's fundamentally predicated on sharing. We want some information. We go and ask people in some form to give information that's in the, you know, somewhere in the recesses of their brains. They share it with us, and then we go and sell it to someone or make predictions based on it, or so on and so forth. And I think too many corporations and frankly individuals look at the perimeters of their own organization or their own circle, and they try to solve problems based on the intelligence they have within those perimeters. And my view is there's incredible amount of intellectual value and information that resides in all kinds of people, places, systems, and things. And we have to find a way in which we're able to glean the best from all these different locations, whether or not they're part of our company. So take this webcast, for instance, right? I mean, 4 different companies are represented on this, you know, Esther, Ivana, Romy, and Lenny. We're all from 4 different companies, but we're all sharing information around trends. And how do we expand that and make that operational? So I think about network intelligence from that perspective, and I think that might presage what the new corporation looks like in you know, in the future, where it's not all about what resides in the brains of your employees, but what resides in the brains of everyone you might be associated with. So I think that's a huge trend, and one in which one that would hold any company in good stead if they capitalized on it. So.
Oh, that's wonderful, wonderful. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about social monitoring. Who wants to jump in first?
Oh, that's all Romy. So.
Well, so
all Romy. All right.
Social monitoring to me is, if you look at the social web for a moment and you look at 4 different aspects of it, it really makes for a very compelling proposition. One is that the amount of information on the social web, as Lenny pointed to earlier, is growing geometrically. It's growing at this incredible rate, and in fact, they're saying that every year the amount of information available triples. The second is that the information on the social web, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or any of the other sort of formations, is sentiment-based, it's emotional-based, it's often ungrammatical, it's asyntactic, it's not like reading a book that's been edited and so on and so forth. And as such, there's a huge sort of data problem we have in terms of deciphering what that is. The third thing is the social media, it's always on, right? 24/7, 365, multi-geography, multipolar, it's everywhere. And the fourth thing is, no matter what we say about it, it is affecting all of our brands, right? And so how do we go monitor the social web in a way that that's easy to understand, that puts all the content in categories and allows us to act on it? And if I might plug my company Metavana, we've built an engine to do just that, where we point our engine at different domains, learn the domain, and then help a a large company or a small company or an individual figure out what exactly is being said about it, him or her on the social web, and to help them act on it. So when I think about social monitoring, I think about thinking about the social web as the new authentic, and for people to understand that every bit of brand equity, just like you have a stock ticker that manages, that tells you your stock price, people are soon going to have a brand equity ticker that measures and monitors what's being said about them on the social web. So that's my perspective on social monitoring.
Got it. Leonard, do you have anything to add to that?
Not really. He really covered it. I think that it's the great untapped pool of data and information that is probably, as we pointed out earlier, one of the major pillars of all of these things that we're talking about. I think without the social web, a lot of the ideas that we're discussing would not be practical. And I think that the impact of social media on us as a species is, we've just begun to understand how it's impacted us. I think it really is almost an evolutionary shift forward. And we're going to see that continue to have profound impact over our businesses over the next few years.
Got it. All right, let's move on to panel communities. This is just, you know, I think we're going to talk about this again. Everything that we're talking about is basically interconnected, so I hope we have time to sort of bring them together. But actually, Leonard, I'd like you to start chatting a little bit about panel communities.
Sure. Well, I think panel communities it's the microcosm of the social networking aspect. It's the old panel model was you got a couple million people and you threw a couple bucks at them and you just hit them over and over and over and over again with surveys. That was the panel model. That's still the panel model. The panel community model is different. The panel community model is more akin to the idea of combining the large reach of a panel, although not necessarily in the millions, generally more in the hundreds or thousands, with the more targeted and collaborative process of an MROC, of a market research online community. So you're able to engage with consumers in a very different way. It's no longer a commoditized process. It is now a deeply value-driven engaged process where consumers are giving their feedback and they're sharing information and they're sharing with one another as well. And brands are getting value from that in an ongoing way. Instead of a kind of a drive-by relationship type of thing, where I think is the usual panel paradigm. This is more of a, we're dating. We're involved in a relationship. So there's more investment on both parties, on both the business and the consumer, to make that work more effectively. I certainly think that it's the great compromise between the old panel model and the community model, and will probably be one of the major drivers of how brands engage with consumers outside of social networks in a more structured way over the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely. Romy?
Yeah, I think what Lenny said is good. The only thing I would add is maybe it's just sort of a soundbite, which is I look at panel communities and I think about us moving from what I call the episodic to the constant, right? The old model, whether it was enterprise feedback or surveys or panels, was every now and then you punctuated your little marketing plan with a thing, and then you did it in the next quarter and maybe the next year, and there was really no continuity, no shared intelligence, no sort of sustainability of the community. And so I think we've got to move away from episodic to continuous or constant, and I think this is the beginning of that. And I actually do applaud Survey Analytics and you, Ivana, for putting this together, because I think one of the themes that we're seeing emerge from this is the movement from the punctuated, nodal, episodic to the constant. So thanks certainly for bringing out all these different trends that are connected in these ways. So.
Yeah, and I think speaking of a small business perspective, that doesn't have a lot of money, one of the things that's profound to me is that when I think about running panels 20 years ago when I was in corporate marketing, this was a major, major investment. And it really wasn't available to people who did not have the resources to fly people in or to, engage in some high-end research with them. And now I think the technology that we have now, whether it's the crowdsourcing, such as like an idea scale where you kind of have a community there, or whether it's through using the mobile technology with Survey Swipe, or whichever way you're using the panel communities, it's, to me, the cost is exponentially lower, and it makes it so much more accessible to those companies that maybe don't have a presence on the social web, like with a broad consumer audience.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So excellent. Thank you for that, you guys. Ooh. Okay. User experience. I'm not really sure who brought this up, if this was a survey analytics trend or one from, from the overall community. I know for a fact that some of the feedback that I had received in doing some work with survey analytics customers is that it is all about the user experience as they interact, whether it's a survey, whether it's, this brings the whole gamification, social media. It's as if we consumers have created a new normal for how we interact and share information, to your point, Romy.
Yep.
What do you guys see?
Lenny, you want to go and take that, and then I can go after that?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think that the bar continues to be raised on the user experience across the board. A lot of that, I think, has been driven by the mobile revolution as well. So delivering a substandard experience just isn't going to cut it anymore. Consumers are empowered today. They know that they have myriad choices, and they know that they are also in demand. There is a lot of people and organizations vying for their attention. So if we're not making it fun, relevant, and rewarding for them, why are they going to do it? There really is no reason to. So I think the user experience has to be a major consideration in any of the things that we're discussing, whether it be gamification or social networking or panel communities, whatever the case may be. We have to think about how the consumers are actually going to experience and enjoy that interaction. That, again, flies in the face of traditional market research thinking. Market research was not built with the idea of thinking of consumers enjoying the experience. It was an expectation. You're going to take your medicine and you're just going to like it and deal with it. And that doesn't fly anymore. We need to win them over. So, yeah, I think it's an important principle that has to be factored into everything that we're doing.
Romy?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a digital marketing background. I was chief marketing officer of a company. So, yeah, a digital marketing agency. Definitely user experience is something that matters. It's actually a function of a couple things, right? One is what Lenny said, which is, people can opt out of things much more easily. Consumer is empowered and they don't need to participate in things, and yet we still covet the information that resides in their head. And so how do you make it possible for them to give it to you? The other thing is we're all frankly just spoiled. I mean, we're used to spending 4 seconds on a website versus 4 minutes. We're used to kind of a normalized ADHD, and as such, it's not clear that that trend will ever change. But part of it's about the consumer being, including myself, being spoiled. Now, back to my earlier point about you can do it right or do it wrong. I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were doing a review of the Kindle Fire, the new Amazon Kindle, which has been obviously selling well and playing to rave reviews. Well, it turns out that one of the things that Amazon did for user experience was what's called one-click buying, where you can just click on one button and you can go and buy a book or whatever else. Well, it turns out that on the Kindle Fire, they've not used parental controls and they still have one-click buying. So if you let your kid run around with your Kindle Fire, you might end up with a bunch of books, candles, and other paraphernalia delivered to you because they just bought some stuff. Right? Now, that's an example of a great user experience used badly, right? And so user experience has to be done well, right? It has to be thought through. It has to take into account scenarios, right? And so my suggestion to everyone is these trends are all like the god Janus. They have the face of the destroyer and the creator, and they've got to be, one's got to be very careful in which face one invokes.
Oh, boy, that's brilliant. Brilliant. I love your what do you call them, sound bites, Romy.
Oh, thank
You're
you.
full of
I'm a
them.
marketer. I live for sound bites.
You know, I made a reference earlier to our survey swipe app and how, and Romy, of course, and I think you did too, Leonard, talked about people engaging with their mobile devices. Why don't, Leonard, you start and talk a little bit about mobile sampling and how that works?
Well, mobile's just huge. Within the next 2 to 3 years, the device similar, probably somewhat bigger than an iPhone, smaller than an iPad, will be the primary means of communication for our entire species globally, period. It's how we interact with each other and the world around us. So it cannot, the impact of mobile cannot be underestimated, and particularly in the emerging markets, because they will leapfrog the PC experience in almost in its entirety. The growth of broadband and PC penetration in Africa, Latin America, and Asia Pacific has effectively already stopped. So there's whole generations that will grow up that will look at a PC like we would look at, a typewriter, and just think it's just an antiquated piece of technology. So their experience with communicating with each other and the world around them will be via this mobile device. So that said, that opens the door for an amazing opportunity to be able to engage with consumers 24/7, 365 in most any situation that you can imagine, and to gain real feedback at the point of experience, whether that be at an event or while shopping or making purchases in a retail environment, whatever the case may be. We have the opportunity now to engage them if we make it a fun and rewarding and meaningful experience for them. And I think that's the challenge. So as we talk about sampling, theoretically, we've come back to the days of random digit sampling, where we can make probability samples because there's just so many mobile connections. I think the reality is that's going to be incredibly difficult to do for a variety of reasons, both technologically and fiscally and politically as well. And so we have to think about ways to utilize the model of the app, which is kind of the great unifier right now, to get consumers to opt in and engage with us. So effectively, when they, anytime you download an app, you're joining a panel, theoretically. Whether 99% of those companies don't use them that way, but the process is the same. You're opting in and giving permission to send and receive certain amounts of information. So that becomes the chance for us to fulfill this vision of engaging with consumers in a very different way than we've ever been able to do before. And I know for a fact that some of the major brands in the world are rejecting the traditional models of market research and are focused on wanting to understand the point of user experience and wanting to understand the levers that make people decide and make choices, and then to use that to predict behavior versus to look backwards and say, well, this is what people did. They would understand what people are going to do. There is no better conduit to achieve that than via this technology.
Wow. That's brilliant. Romy?
When I think about mobile in general, not so much mobile sampling, clearly the trend lines are that it's growing, and so on and so forth. It reminds me of the second sort of wave of the communications revolution around what Marshall McLuhan said about the medium is the message. Because when I think about what people do on their mobile devices and whether they might interact or do surveys or give information or invoke an app, it's being done at a time, in a context, in a place that provides a lot more depth of context to the receiver of the signal, right? So, for instance, if I leave a movie and I get on a mobile app to say if I like it or not, I'm right in the midst of that experience. I'm in situ, as it were. And so when I think about mobile, I think about the fact that people are interacting on their mobile devices in a time and space in which the context is more profound, is actually itself the benefit here. It's not so much the convenience. I don't think it's so much the fact that we couldn't, we were all lived before. We all were happy people before we had mobile devices and could book restaurants online and so on, right? Or through our mobile devices. It's that we have a different way of expressing ourselves with regard to the context we're in. And so to me, this trend is undeniable. It's one that's best connected to the way the human emotional profile works. The one area that I might diverge with Lenny is I don't know that that this is really going to be, these media are going to be the primary way people interact. Certainly in parts of the world that are getting more and more poor and have less drinking water and less access to medicines, I think the mobile revolution has largely skipped them. But by and large, again, for those of us who are lucky enough and economically well off enough to be able to enjoy these devices, the context they provide is just unbelievable. And so I would concur with Lenny in that this is a trend that it's like a locomotive that's moving, and you should probably get out of its way or join in.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. We probably have another 15 minutes and a few more trends to go through. So who wants to jump in on mobile ethnography? Romy?
Yeah, I mean, this one is not dissimilar to the other one, right, which is, instant access to respondents. Meanwhile, they have instant access within context to you. And so I think that there's so much you can glean by learning from people in context, right? It's a 100-year-old anthropological notion that if you watch people in the action of living, you'll learn a lot more about them. And in the case of mobile, you're actually getting people at a time when what they have to say is inflected by experience. So I don't have a lot more to say about it than that, but it's definitely a trend and definitely something that we should capitalize on, both from the point of making money, but also from the point of understanding the context in which humans operate.
Yeah, I would agree. And so even from a business standpoint, particularly in the realm of market research, yesterday I interviewed Eric Salama, who is the chair and global CEO of Kantar Group, which is the world's largest market research company. And it was amazing how much he focused in on qualitative as the real growth opportunity. And even though he didn't say it, I believe this is what he was referring to, is that new technologies like mobile, particularly mobile ethnography, have allowed us to, or will allow us to, qualitatively understand consumers in a very different way. Market research has been defined by the quantitative, by the numbers crunching for a long time, and there's a real shift occurring that's into the emotional versus the cognitive, and ethnography is a huge piece of that. I love what Romy's saying about context. I think that it really is the key.
Absolutely, and it really is almost what I hear you guys saying is that we're probably evolving to a place where we will literally be able to quantify the emotional experience at some point.
I think so. And behavioral economics would certainly indicate that is the case.
Yep. And
wow. Well, guess what, you guys? Yeah, you have covered just about everything. So one thing that we can do is open it up for questions. And while you guys are thinking about questions, to type into the chat box for our experts. Anything you guys, Romy, anything you want to say to kind of bridge some things together? Or maybe like, what are, this is making my head swim, quite frankly. And I guess the question I have for you is, what are some things that I should start doing? You gave us some books to read. And what are some things that we can start doing differently?
Here's how I sort of approach it in my life, right? I look at, I just sort of carry my normal life around. I read a lot. I look at different things. I look at trends, etc. And I try to apply all these principles to even non-business scenarios, right? How do you use all these to understand what's going on in the Arab Spring? How do you use all these to understand what's going on with the Euro crisis, right? And when that sort of brings it all together to me, because I think business, culture, sociology, research, they're all connected issues, right? And so that's certainly what I do. I would love, I do think people should go and get a primer on each of these sort of 8 or 9 subjects we covered. Each one of them we can, of course, go into in more depth. The one area that you brought up, Ivana, that I do want to emphasize again is these trends are important discreetly, but much more powerful when you combine them, right? So if you think about, let's see, mobile gamification, or you think about using network intelligence to improve your consumer experience, etc. So when you start combining them in dyads or more, I think you get a lot more power out of it. And sort of, again, the network effect for each one of us on this webcast to continue to talk about these things and either build businesses, nonprofits, or whatever out of these, I think is super important. So,
Leonard, how would you wrap it up?
No, I would agree with Romy. And actually, we're not like there, buddy. I didn't realize that was kind of what you did too. It's all about making connections, and That's what I look at these things do and make connections, and I may or may not be correct in what I think they mean, but certainly the evidence seems to be bearing out that we are looking at a shift in the way that we engage with each other and with consumers in a variety of ways, and what that means from the ability to drive value through insight. Now, the one thing we didn't touch on, though, is the so-called DIY movement, and which I know would be near and dear to Vivex's heart, and also to
Ivana's heart too.
yeah. And right before this call, you may have heard me blurt it out. I just saw the transom come through that SurveyMonkey bought Market Tools. That is such a clear message that this whole notion we've had of DIY as being, excuse me, subpar or less than, that just got blown out of the water.
Well, that's Romy's consumerism at play. And
Absolutely, and think about it from a revenue standpoint. So, survey. I've always been, I know Vivek probably wouldn't let me talking about SurveyMonkey, but but you have to, because they are the 500-pound gorilla on the block as far as this model goes, and they're a massive company, and now they have always kind of fought against this legitimacy issue, and I think that has certainly impacted anybody who uses that whole DIY type of idea. What it's really about is empowerment. It's about insourcing.
Exactly.
And
well,
so
one of the things, the risk, I'm going to ask Esther to jump in here, so I'm giving you fair warning if you're on mute, Esther. But I'm going to rave, one of the benefits I see as a shameless plug for Survey Analytics. I'm a customer, and one of the benefits that I see is the fact that it's a platform that has a variety of brands that are all interconnected, and that allows you, with one point, to actually use a lot of these trends. So you can use MicroPanel to build your own panel. You can use Survey Swipe with your MicroPanel. You can use, what was the other one? Oh, Idea Scale, and do polls. And that's something that, so all your data is in one place. And for those of us that are DIY marketers, that's a huge benefit. I mean, who's going to manage all these vendors?
Right.
I totally agree. I think technology, and from a DIY perspective, has allowed us to encroach on the priesthood, and
it's the Protestant Revolution of research.
It really is. Whether it's the church or a Penn State's football team, the priesthood has got to be broken down, and I'm super happy to see the DIY pieces and so many different companies that are now understanding that there's so much power that resides in individuals to go do amazing things from a marketing and business perspective. So.
Now, see, I think that market researchers who are hung up on the DIY thing and see it as a threat are kind of grooving on the wrong story. It really is a huge opportunity for market researchers, who have a technical clue, to guide people and to really serve as a resource of how to do it right. Because, Romy, you gave several examples of doing it right and doing it wrong, right? And if you ignore the core principles and the actual science of it, you're doing it wrong.
Yep, you can, and that can be far more damaging than not doing anything at all. So.
Yeah, but the other piece of that is market research finds that threat.
I hear Esther.
Oh,
Sorry, guys.
Sorry, guys.
Sorry, Esther, go ahead.
I do see that there's some questions, Ivana, from the crowd.
Great.
I'm wondering if you, I love hearing you guys talk. It's fantastic. However, I really would like to get some feedback from and some questions answered for our audience members. Ivana, do you see where the questions are on your end? So maybe you can go in there and pose questions for them.
Oh, you know what? They were hidden, but I can click through them. Oh, it's so hard to see. How do I make them bigger? I see one. I'm going to try. Oh, I see several. Ooh, oh my gosh, there's tons. Yeah. Okay, let's see here. Yeah. Oh, Esther. Okay, wait. Can you give examples of how mobile ethnographies are executed? Going back. Sorry, gamification is a buzzword. Okay, so how are mobile ethnographies executed?
Sure. The dominant model is not that different than any other mobile mobile research process, you need to get people to download the app, and it should be an app because of the technical capabilities of integrating with the phone's video and audio. So the first task is get people to download the app, and once they're there, then the app becomes the way that you engage them in the ethnographic task sets. So let's say it's a night out on the town, and you want to understand 18 to 25-year-old urban males Friday night process. So throughout the evening, you'll ping them and say, "Take a picture. What are you doing right now? What drinks are you drinking? What are you eating?" Whatever the case may be, and then the respondent population just does that, and they upload it, and then the researcher goes through and analyzes it. I mean, that's certainly simplistic, but that's the gist.
Oh, great. I'm trying to expand the questions because they are so hard to read. They're not giving me a big space here. I have comments here about consumerization. Well, my goodness. Esther, can you see the questions bigger?
No, unfortunately, I set you as the organizer, so only one person can see them, so I can't even see them.
Okay.
You might be able to have them as a separate screen, but if you click on it twice, but I don't know if that's going to work for you.
Here we go. Okay. Gamification is a huge buzzword, and I agree it will eventually be huge for this and other industries. Oh, crap. Eventually, come on. Without investing significantly, throwing badges and prizes at consumers simply becomes a gimmick, especially when everyone is doing it. Do you see this as a trend that will really come to the fore this coming year, or will it follow SCVNGR? Big splash, but didn't expect it to be massive for a few years.
Let me answer that question super quickly. I agree that it's when you talk about buzzwords and one has to be careful of them. I think I go back to this principle of gamification by design. I think gamification as an afterthought is going to be gimmicky, but you have to start thinking about it from at the very essence of how you're building out your business or your interface or whatever. So I would suggest that, again, it's part of the very warp and woof of what you do versus a bolt-on.
Yeah, I would use the example of 3D in movies. There's Avatar, and then there's Clash of the Titans. When you're thinking about the process from the ground up on incorporating game mechanics that are not based on prizes, let's be clear about that. Gamification is not about prizes. It is in the classical sense that research thinks about it as throwing money at people. That is not necessarily part of the equation. So those prizes can come in lots of different ways. Social esteem, sense of accomplishment, badges. Survey Analytics has Badge Farm. There's an example. It's not always about money. Sometimes it's about the intangibles that are the rewards of a truly well-done gamification process.
Esther, is there anything that you wanted to wrap up with in terms of technologies that we didn't cover, or features that listeners can use inside of the Survey Analytics Question Pro and other brand platforms?
Actually, I had a question for both Romy and Leonard. Out of all of the trends that we had presented, which one of these ones do you think is the most important one to really keep an eye out on?
So I can answer it. It's Romy. I mean, the trends are all at different valence levels, right? So clearly, the cliche is to say that the mobile trend is by far the biggest of the sort of 8 or 9 we mentioned, right? It's a fundamental sort of step away from one kind of paradigm into another one. So I would say that would be the biggest of the ones. Although, to Ivana's point earlier, the other ones can really aid and abet the mobile revolution.
Hmm.
That's a good point.
Excellent. Any last words from Leonard? Did you want to jump in on that one?
I think the network intelligence is the trend to watch. The future is big data and the predictive capabilities of big data. Everything else we're talking about is a way to feed the monster, so to speak.
Wow, interesting.
I love Well, thank you guys. I really, really want to acknowledge you for being here with us and sharing your wisdom with the overall community. I don't think I see any more questions. There was a question on here that wanted to know who the lady was from Survey Analytics. That would be Esther Rama. And I'm Ivana Taylor from DIY Marketers. We got Romi Mahajan from Metavana, as well as Leonard Murphy from our favorite Green Book blog. Esther, I'm going to hand it over to you to wrap it up.
Okay, great. Ivana, before you go, would it be possible to just go ahead and copy all of those questions? It would be great to maybe do some follow-up on those just to make sure. I think they'd make really good follow-up posts for our blog. Everything that you see here, including the slides and the recording, will be available on our blogs at the end of the day. And that's going to be on blog.questionpro.com, blog.surveyanalytics.com. We've got blogs for our survey pockets, survey swipes. Every single item we have, we've got a blog. This is going to be on there. And I believe we also will have Romy and Leonard be distributing it through their network as well. So once again, there's some information here on this page. If you want to contact any of our speakers, feel free to do so. We are happy to follow up with any additional questions that you might have as you come up onto the new year. So again, thank you everyone. Thank you, Ivana for moderating, Romy and Leonard for joining us today for this really fabulous webinar. It's probably one of my most favorite ones I've listened to this entire year. So I really appreciate your participation. And thank you everyone for attending, and we're going to go ahead and conclude our presentation for today.
Thank you all. It was a great joy. Take care.
Yeah, thank you everybody. This was great. Take care.
Bye-bye.